Now, I'm going to continue what I started. Last time we were live, no, was it last time or the time before? I don't even remember. I've mentioned in the past that all these near-death experiences that you read about you have to be careful. Do I believe there's legitimate ones? Absolutely. I'm going to read to you tonight one that I believe is legitimate. But if you have a good grip on the rightly divided Word of God, you could sort out some of the nonsense that is out there. Especially these near-death experience people that all of a sudden become preachers and they try to justify their near-death experience with twisting a scripture and inserting it into their message that really doesn't make the cut. That's the best way to put it. But I don't rule out anything because of the nuts out there. There's going to be nuts on every subject, on every topic. That goes without saying. But there's a few out there. Oh, there's more than a few, but there's a few, and I think that this person I'm going to read to you tonight is one of those few that I believe had a near-death experience. And he doesn't get into all the religious tones like you see a lot of these near-death experience perpetrators. I'll just read it to you. Doctor on verge of death fell into a coma. He claims he saw heaven and he recovered in 2 months. Is there really a heaven? Do people have souls? And that's the subject we've been on lately, souls and spirit. So I thought it would be interesting to read this to you tonight. Take it for what you want to believe in. I believe his experience. You have to make that decision yourself. Do people have souls? Dr. Eben Alexander, a former associate professor of neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School, answered these questions with his own experience. Dr. Alexander has been a researcher in neurosurgery for 25 years and is known worldwide for his development of modern neurosurgical techniques and treatment of complex brain diseases. During his 15 years at Harvard Medical School, he published over 150 neurosurgical articles, both individually and with others. In 2008, without warning, Dr. Alexander developed an extremely rare form of bacterial meningitis that was hardly documented in the medical literature. That's how rare it was. He fell into a coma within a few hours. Dr. Alexander, a former lifelong believer in science, said that he saw heaven while in the coma and realized that these phenomenon, which he had previously considered nonsense, were in fact no fantasy. He wrote a book about his experiences titled Proof of Heaven. The following are some highlights from his interview. In November 2008, I suddenly developed a severe case of bacterial meningitis and was admitted to the hospital's intensive care unit. It was an extremely rare form of meningitis that was barely documented in the medical literature. Within a few hours, I fell into a deep coma. In my coma, I found myself rescued by a slowly spinning white light with a perfect musical melody. Kind of reminds you of the spinning wheels, possibly that Ezekiel experience. But let's keep reading. The white light was surrounded by golden and silvery hair-like things. Then a gorgeous and very real entrance valley slowly opened. At that time, my consciousness was only the size of a speck of light. There were several million, on the wings of a butterfly. There were several million butterflies flying around me. So his consciousness was only the size of a speck of light on the wings of a butterfly. There was a lush green and vibrant meadow below. There was no sign of death or decline. There were thousands of lives dancing down there, and I called them, quote, souls among lives, end of quote. Lives, L-I-V-E-S. The place was filled with joy, with angels singing from high above and pure soul pearls being pulled out of the lights and reflecting against the deep blue sky. And there were songs coming from all around. A thunderbolt passed through my consciousness, which was the first thing I knew in this dimension. I knew that I was loved by a loving, compassionate, divine being who was not a judge. I could feel that this divine being was very compassionate. I had no memory of this world at that time, and I had no memory of this world at that time, and I had forgotten the language. I had no recollection of Eben Alexander's life or my knowledge of the universe, and my memory was empty. Fortunately, I was not alone. Our consciousness was all on the wings of a butterfly. A very beautiful lady was beside me, and her clothes were the same as the attires of the joyful dancing beings in the valley. She and I had a deep connection. She was my guardian angel. Throughout my journey, she was the one who telepathically sent me all the comforting messages. Quote, you will always be loved and cherished. You don't need to be afraid. You will be well taken care of. End of quote. There are no words to describe how beautiful it was, and I think that was the message I wanted to bring back to this world. Because when I woke up in the ICU after the near-death experience, for a moment I couldn't recognize my family members who were at my bedside, including my mother, wife, and son. All I knew was that I had been on a strange and mysterious journey. If you saw my condition, you would think that I was hopeless. However, I miraculously recovered 2 months later. Almost all the doctors said that I survived because of the near-death experience I had. Nevertheless, I don't think I just survived, but I recovered completely and became more energetic. In the hours following the near-death experience, my language returned, and within a few days my childhood memories came back. My knowledge of the language, neurology, the brain, the universe, and the physics was all restored within 2 months of waking up from that coma. I documented the neocortical damage to my brain to prove that what I saw was not a dream, hallucination, or fiction. In fact, there is clear medical evidence that my neocortex was in a state of damage. According to the Glasgow Coma Scale, a score of 15 is normal. A score of below 9 is considered being in a deep coma, and a score of 3 is considered being a corpse. For most of the time, I was in a coma, and my score would have been 6 or 7, and sometimes as low as 5. In addition, CT and MRI brain tests show that all 8 lobes of my brain were affected. So my own cerebral cortex would not have been able to generate this experience. I think it's important to point out that the conventional science based on Newtonian materialism, which is promoted by the mainstream media today, should have been disproved 80 years ago, when quantum physics was born. Yet many in the scientific community have not yet emerged from their confusion. I spent the first 54 years of my life in the worldview of conventional science. I taught neurosurgery at the Harvard Medical School for over 15 years. And I thought I knew a thing or two about the brain, thoughts, and consciousness. However, after my near-death experience in 2008 and nearly 12 years of scientific research, I gained a much deeper understanding of how science understands the brain, mind, consciousness, and reality. The idea of free consciousness is much more convincing than the outdated materialism ideology. I did not believe it before the coma, and this experience has brought about a refreshing change in my understanding of humanity and the universe. Remember, his cerebral cortex was nearly shut down. The lobes were not functioning. None of this should have happened, what he experienced. But nevertheless, he experienced it. We mistakenly believe that consciousness is generated by the material brain, as I did before I fell into the coma, but this is not true. The new theory in science is the filtering theory. That is, the brain is like a physical processing plant. Our will is free even when it's not in the brain, and it possesses great power to influence the physical world. The placebo effect, for example, is a miraculous healing effect that occurs when the patient is simply comforted in the mind. The book Spontaneous Remission documented over 35 unexplained cases of self-recovery from cancer and infectious and degenerative diseases in the mid-1990s. The reason was often that the patient's own faith had an unexpected healing effect. Actions such as sitting in meditation and praying can also help people enter a healing state, as I've experienced with my therapeutic near-death experience. Although our modern medicine is largely unable to explain how near-death experience can have miraculous healing effects, we can also look to other near-death experiences for reference. For instance, Anita Morjani recovered from being on the verge of death from cancer, and skeletal surgeon Mary C. Neal miraculously recovered 30 minutes after drowning. These separate cases of spiritual healing are all amazing examples. And the placebo effect is similar to the effect of praying, which is a very powerful healing method. If our consciousness can influence our bodies and healing effects, it can probably influence what happens in real life as well. My story is so powerful that hundreds of doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers, especially those who work with the deceased, have realized that when the material body dies, the consciousness does not die with it. They have seen so much evidence. You mean it's not soul sleeping? A devout believer in science became a believer in the existence of heaven. In fact, near-death experience is not a modern term. It existed as early as in the time of Plato, who recorded a life review of after he was supposedly dead in battle, but he revived. When revived, he told the other soldiers, quote, "When you die, you will see all the important things in your life flashing in front of your eyes. The most important thing I learned from retrospect is that we exist to love each other." End of quote. Now, I could go to the New Testament. And what is the commandment that Christ gave? To love God and to love one another. To love God and to love one another. You've seen that love one another over and over, especially in John's a gospel record. And also in 1st and 2nd John. After exploring this, we believe that the power of the divine is absolutely real. From a scientific and philosophical point of view, materialism was already outdated 80 years ago. However, I was not exploring religious beliefs. From 2002 until my coma, my soul was lost for many years. I gave up my faith in God. I gave up praying. I stopped taking my sons to church. I stopped praying for them at night. However, my near-death experience proved to me forever and without question that the power of God's mercy is absolutely real in this universe. Similar experiences from many other people have also proven this. The most important thing we learn from near-death experience is that to do unto others we have them to do unto you. Well, there's more important things than even that, but it's okay. He's a work in progress. A truth that is built into every foundation of the universe. If we cause suffering to others without reason, we will pay the price in our passing. When passing through a dimension with life reviews, like the valley I passed through, we experience the same pain as the persons we hurt. So for some people who have hurt others, their life review experience will be hellish. In the midst of all the light and compassion, the pain and suffering is particularly visible. But there are also a series of corrections to help us, so that in the next life, we are more loving. That's the ultimate destination of consciousness through this process. I would say that it changed everything. It changed my perception on the existence of my soul, my relationship with the universe, and my relationship with others. And that's the key thing there. So is it a spirit that left the body? Or both soul and spirit? Or the spirit remained because he still wasn't technically dead, but his soul, where the consciousness is held, left his body. And if it did, it went somewhere. It didn't go to sleep. And like I said, there's a lot of stories out there that just doesn't jive with me about these near-death experiences. But there's some that kind of ring true, even though I don't necessarily agree with all the interpretation that he experienced and what he's relaying in this article. I have no doubt he experienced it. I'm not the only one. Over 90% to 95% of people who experience near-death experiences woke up more compassionate, less materialistic, and more focused on helping others and showing kindness and affection. I came back from my journey with the realization that one of our greatest challenges is how to to enrich our understanding of God's compassionate providence, which is what we really need to do. The most profound and difficult part of this experience is not what happens after we die, but how we live this life soberly and meaningfully. We need to recognize that our souls are connected to God and to the lies of the universe, and to use that to guide our lives. I also believe that the source of life is not evolutionary, as Darwin believed. Even so, this misinterpretation has permeated our economic, political, and social systems and have evolved into the so-called survival of the fittest, every man for himself, and elimination of those who compete with you. This is not right. Modern biology has found many examples to prove the existence of intraspecies and interspecies cooperation and communication, such as dolphins helping whales deliver, and different species helping each other. When we are born into this world in the physical body, we seem to be abandoned by the spiritual world. Nevertheless, what people forget is that we are not really abandoned. We just need to rediscover the connection. In particular, we need to experience our world fully so that we can live it more meaningfully. I think that's all I'm going to read to you. The most important connection is connection with Jesus, which reconnects us with God. Now, like I said, this person's a work in progress. He has that scientific brain that he has to work through some things, in my opinion. But I don't doubt on what he experienced. And I have read through a few, well, I read through many, but through a few, that if the soul dies, or the soul doesn't leave the body in that near-death experience, Paul I believed, had a near-death experience. I've talked about this before. After one of the stonings. I don't remember what message that was a part of, and maybe somebody could figure that out. And in that dying state, he had a near-death experience. And he was taken to the third heaven. I believe his soul did. I don't believe it was the spirit. Now, am I 100% on that? No. There's always room for correction if needed to be corrected. I believe it was a soul experience he had because his consciousness went with him, like I said. And he got to experience some of those things that he saw, just like this individual did. And not just consciousness, but emotions have to be attached to it. Now, he's very colorful in the way he describes it, that his consciousness is like a speck on the wings of a butterfly. But whatever it is, there's things we can't explain. You think our soul covers our head to toe? You ever ask yourself that question? Or is it just a microscopic part of our body? More than likely, somewhere between the ears. All these are very interesting questions. Like I said, our salvation is not dependent upon it. But these are the questions that Christians are afraid to ask because, and preachers just don't want to preach on it, because there's so much argument and debate about whether there's soul sleep, whether there's not soul sleep, what happens to the spirit. It goes on, and all the different kind of theories that they develop to try to explain what they believe in. All it is a philosophical explanation of your opinion. And I've kind of went through scriptures where I believe our soul doesn't sleep. Now, I'm going to pick up on this because this is all part of the area that I'm in the last days teaching right now that needs to be established before we move further. And we got a few more, probably, if I get all in one, but a few more of these types of sermons before we move on. For some of you, the debate will still continue. The debate is pretty much concluded in my mind that our soul does not sleep. Spirit goes back to God. I believe the soul goes maybe to that third heaven, that waiting stage before Christ comes and we come with him if we already went on, if we're not still living on this planet. But if we still are, that's a whole other thing that happens. And we all get a new body in the process. Now, people think, well, what about the judgment of all these other individuals that are not in Christ? You think the judgment is going to happen all at once? It's a silly concept that's also preached out there. There's a millennium for a reason. But that's hopefully a future topic in the series. But now I want to hear from you. Play a song.